You're listening to the Perth Property Show, Australia's only weekly property podcast by West Australian experts for West Australian listeners. Catch your latest episode every Monday at 7 a.m.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another week of the Perth Property Show. I'm your host, Trent Fleskins. We are talking subdivision again with our subdivision expert, my favourite subdivision project manager in Western Australia, and he's my project manager. It's David Gilbert. Thank you very much. I appreciate you coming back into the soundproof studio, mate.
Yeah, thank you for having me back and looking forward to it.
Keeping you away from your work, I understand, but thank you for your time. Last time we spoke about an introduction, we were sitting on the basics of what is subdivision, how does it work, what are the R codes, splitting up land, how does that suit. We prefaced that this one would be all about talking on the costs, the risks, and those two tie themselves in together. And I guess we can have some realistic conversations about timeframes and things like that, because time is money in property and investment, given most of these things are financed with interest, and that is a big effect on any development.
Yeah, we did touch on the timelines last time as well, speaking about the typical subdivision taking about a year. So when you take that into account, it does become quite a long time frame, and interest on any loans would certainly become a huge factor in terms of your feasibility of doing a subdivision.
As much as a project manager in the subdivision space will work as fast as they can, a lot of this timeline really is dictated by how fast the stakeholders, the government organisations move, isn't it?
Yeah, we touched on it again last time I was here. So 7 months would be the quickest time that you would ever get a subdivision done. And of that, you're looking at about that long time frame in terms of just paperwork.
Most of the rest of the work gets done in the space of a couple of days or in the meantime, right?
Yeah, so if you were getting it done, all your subdivision work, so clearing the lot and everything else was done prior to getting the conditional approval, you will have 7 months worth of paperwork waiting for different agencies to clear your subdivision.
Yeah.
So it's important that you tee all these works up together and submit the right applications, so you're not waiting 3 weeks to get a refusal to say, oh, you didn't fill out this properly. So that's one of the huge hurdles for any first-timers, is actually filling out that paperwork correctly and making sure that you're providing all the correct evidence that whatever authority it is can actually clear whatever the condition that they're responsible for.
These conditions can range from 3 or 4 or 5 to 14, right?
Yeah.
In number.
Yeah. So within our own work, we've got conditional approvals that range from 3 conditions all the way up to 14. And it's a variety of different conditions as well. It's very important that if someone is looking at doing a subdivision, that they get professional advice.
And what those conditions could be, because they all have a cost.
Exactly.
Yep.
And just because your mate did it in another suburb nearby
or next door,
we've been looking at properties where there are now development contributions which add an extra 7-10 grand to your subdivision.
Yep. Whereas
the property across the road wouldn't get that condition.
So let's rattle off some costs right now as to what they might be, and we'll start adding it to our calculator in our heads as to where this is going. Because I think a lot of people think that they go and buy a block that's subdividable, easy enough. We all can go and buy a house. We then put an application in for subdivision, costs a couple of $1,000 probably, and then a month or two later, we have it split up, ready to sell. If only, right?
Yeah, if only. And that's what a lot of people think, that's the time frames and costs involved in it.
So where should we start, Dave?
We'll start from the very start. So the first item that we've got to get is a feature survey.
Mm-hmm.
So pick up all the features on the land, and from there we'll draw a subdivision design on there, and then that is what gets lodged to the West Australian Planning Commission, to WPC,
yep,
as an application. So that first process, as a ballpark figure, you'll be looking at somewhere close to $4,000 just to submit that first application. Of that $4,000, you've got an application fee that's close to 3,200, plus whatever survey works cost, depending on your lot size and design that you're going for.
And where are you getting these surveys and designs done?
From strategic surveying, hopefully.
That'd be a start.
Yeah, that would be a good start.
But any surveying company?
Any surveying company can do those initial plans for you. You can even contact builders who will typically outsource that, but you can engage them to arrange that sort of works for you.
Yep. Important, really, I think, to talk quickly about the design. Often you go to a builder, they'll get the design carved up specifically to their build that they put forward, or you go straight to a surveyor, they'll carve it up probably equally or as equally as possible, or as square in number as possible. But really, for me, I find that consultation between both surveyor and builder, and a number of builders, gives you both the optionality of being able to speak to a number of builders and tender out that build, but also make sure that you're not just creating a block that looks good on paper, but really is going to be quite expensive to build on.
Yeah, and you touched on the actual process that we would prefer that you do, is go through and think about, okay, the end product that's going to be here is going to be a house. So what sort of designs are possible going to be there? But a lot of the time people might only be doing it as a land subdivision. So what you are designing in terms of subdivision layout, you need to think about what is that future owner going to place there? And if you can do a subdivision design or a lot shape that's going to be more forgiving for any sort of house design, the easier you're going to be able to sell that lot.
Well, I mean, some of the R codes allow for an 8 metre wide frontage, right? Mm-hmm. But if it's in an area where no one's going to afford to build a 2-storey house, it's going to be very hard pressed to be able to get anyone to want to buy that block, because they're not going to be able to build a 1-storey house on there of any real amenity. Yeah,
there's good examples all the way for the city of Joondalup where it's, you get the split zoning now, where it's originally R20 with split zoning of R40, R60. You could subdivide your lot to as small as 120 square metres, but then who's going to be the person buying it? Well, they're going to build on it. So you need to take consideration of where you are, who are you trying to sell this product to, and what is that product that you're wanting to produce at the end.
We've got our survey done. We've designed a subdivision that meets good building opportunity for us or the future buyer. We've lodged our application. It's taken 90 days. It's come back with a conditional approval. What might those conditions be, and what cost implications might they have on us?
Yes, so we've up to 4 months now. So we've
got some interest at that point. Yep.
So the first thing that's going to happen is you're going to get letters from Western Power and Water Corp. They will be informing you that you need to connect to underground power and also pay additional connection fees for the utilities. So you're going to get, as an example, Water Corp for a 2-lot subdivision, you're going to be looking at somewhere close to 5.8. So if you allocate for 6, it's probably a good idea, but you're going to need to engage a plumber to do some internal works as well. So if we just group water together and sewer, you're looking at about $7,000 there. Western Power and electrician, you're looking at somewhere close to potentially $4,000 to $6,000.
It depends. If you've got a house, most of these houses that are subdividable, they've still got overhead power. Western Power is pretty smart. They've gone, we're not going to bother with changing this under our money. We'll wait until it gets asked to be subdivided, and then we'll put that as a condition for the developer to pay to convert that front house and the back house into underground power with a green dome.
Yes, so keeping your existing house, if you are retaining it as overhead power, isn't going to be an option. You're going to have to convert it.
You have to pay electrician for that, right?
That's right. And Western Power for the dome. And it's also one of these items where if you've sought the right advice from the start, you're going to have a design that may take these items into consideration, so that when you request your Western Power connection or a new dome, it's placed in a location where you're not having to pay extra money for a main site switchboard, which you might not know about. Or
that's an extra $1,500.
Yeah, when you start adding all these numbers up and the additional costs that come from not knowing what these items could be, and then you look back at it in hindsight and think, well, I just wish I paid someone to look at this fully for me or to manage the project for me. That's always something to keep in mind when you're doing these things for the first time. All these items are changing, and they're always
going up,
and there's new conditions required. It's a snowball effect in terms of costs.
Yeah, we've spoken about Water Corp. We need to pay these taxes essentially for every new lot you're creating. It's around $6,000 to $7,000.
Yeah. Right.
So if you're doing a triplex, you'd be thinking more like $14,000 as a round number. For Western Power, they want you to convert to underground. If you've already got underground, they still want you to pay for extra connection fees. So there's the cost. Who else would be putting conditions on this subdivision?
The rest of the other conditions are going to be ones from council. The most common ones are obviously going to be clearing the lot, because what you're trying to deliver at the end is a lot that's going to be able to be developed on. So
a stockland, saddly piece of land, right?
Yeah, if you think about just those big, large subdivisions, greenfield subdivisions, that's essentially what you're trying to provide, but on a smaller scale. So your lot has to be clear of any obstructions, it needs to have access, and it needs to have access to utilities. And that's what you're trying to actually provide in this process. So we've got water, we've done power, we're now having to actually provide the land portion. So that land portion is going to be a demolition contractor to clear out the lot, and then it may be any retaining if required.
You probably want to do some fencing?
Probably want to do some fencing. The fencing won't be a condition of the subdivision, but it's going to be an item that you're going to want to add in because you are wanting to present the best product that you can, to any prospective
especially for a house behind a house. A lot of people, when they're starting off, they think that a house behind a house is the cheapest, or a retain and split, where they just sell the land at the back. Often it's not, because the number of conditions the council puts on, which are things you have to pay for with cash, become much more expensive than knocking it down, and all you have to do is a demolition.
Yeah, exactly right. So if you're doing a house behind a house, you'll be looking at other things such as having to construct the access way, including
the driveway,
drainage, including the driveway, which may later on actually get destroyed when the person goes to build. City
of Swan does a crazy thing. We've seen this a bit. Kalamunda as well, where it doesn't matter what your plan is, doesn't matter if you've built at the back or not, or you're about to build, they don't care. They want that driveway ripped up, replaced with new stormwater and new paving. And even if you're going to bring a concrete truck in next week for the slab at the back, not their problem.
Yeah, and I do understand their perspective of what they're trying to do in that instance. This is where like bonds were a great idea, but financially it becomes a bit difficult having to pass it on, is that they want to provide a lot that anyone can go develop on. So even though if you're thinking of building on it, or you're the one going to be doing the future works, there's no guarantee from the council's perspective that you will actually go ahead with that work. So once they issue the titles, they've got no control over what's now been done. So they're trying to protect everyone in that sense, but it does also add these additional costs, which would be nice if we were able to go back to bonds, or if they're a bit more flexible.
Limestone access track.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
That's become really hard, though, especially when it's mandated with councils these days a lot that if you're going to have common property, the front house needs to have a dogleg driveway coming off of that common property. It makes it really hard if you're going to have a limestone access way for the driveway portion and then have bricks or a concrete slab halfway down for the front lot as new driveway. It just doesn't really work, right?
Yeah, and we've seen other people do that before. Good luck selling it, and if you're going to go that far of all that sort of works, you might as well do the full thing.
What we're missing here, really, we've spoken about the physical charges of new driveway, new stormwater, maybe some retaining, definitely demo. We're going to need a crossover upgrade normally, or replacement. What about government charges in terms of taxes?
Right now,
costs,
you've got a smile on your face.
Yes, the juicy stuff that everyone scratches their head at. The money grabs. Tell me about them.
There's a variety of different avenues that councils have for those contributions. So there's going to be items such as right of way if you have an access way at the back.
Making you rebuild that right of way, even if you don't use it.
Making you build it or contribute to a future cost of them doing it.
There goes 15 grand.
There goes 15 grand. Lighting contribution, there goes 4 grand. If there's a development contribution plan in place for that council, you may be looking at somewhere between 7 to 14 grand that you won't see any works for. It's literally just paying into a general fund that the council will use in the future to do upgrades in your area.
What about POS? Tell us about that juicy one.
Public open space. If you are doing a large subdivision, this is where POS becomes more applicable. If you're doing a big greenfield subdivision, they want to make sure that you're including parks and different green spaces. It makes sense in that sort of scale.
It's a state government policy for Nigel Satterley, and it all makes sense.
Yeah, but that same policy that enforces that public open space contribution or land seating is applied to 5-lot subdivisions and upwards.
Sometimes 3, right?
Sometimes 3, depending on what the council has in their own policies. So if you are just doing an infill development where there's no way that council's going to be adding any new land to this area, you're still paying a contribution of 10% of your land value as cash to council.
Tens of thousands of dollars.
Tens of thousands of dollars.
You want to go do a triplex in the city of Stirling? Tens of thousands of dollars. You want to do a side-by-side? There is no public open space policy that hits that level of development.
And you're not paying for an access way to construct either.
Exactly right. So it can become super expensive. You wouldn't know it based on different councils. To do, for example, a triplex. Go to City of Joondalup. They don't have a public open space contribution policy. Go to City of Swan, they're normally worried at above 5. Kalamunda, 5 and above. City of Bayswater, 5 and above. Stirling, 3 and above. And they've done that on purpose as well, I think, not just as a money grab, but to also stymie the onset from their ridiculous policies of blanket rezoning through Balga, Nollamara, Westminster to slow down the triplexes that are going in there.
That's a very good way of actually looking at it, is the variety of different avenues that council have to try and control the way that development is taking place.
Yeah.
You do have these giant areas where they've had the increase of densities, but they have all these other attachments to the design side of things, trying to make sure that, look, we want you to develop, but we want you to do it in a certain way, or we want to look like we're trying to get you to develop, but also at the same time making sure that we're protecting certain land sizes for the future development.
So let's say we pay these works, these fees, we get all through that stage. We then need to get the property pegged by a licensed surveyor, right?
Yep. So
there's some costs there.
Yeah. So as soon as you've done the demolition and your property is clear, we can get the licensed surveyor in to put the subdivision pegs in.
You need that just to get the Western Power stuff sorted, right?
Yeah, Western Power will ask for a peg to be installed prior to them actually installing any sort of underground power. As soon as you do that demolition, which should be the first item you do, you apply for all the different contribution fees from Western Power Water Corp. So demo, get the surveyor in, peg the lot, and then start rolling through any other items that are hanging on to the end. So the survey works alone just to do the pegging of the actual subdivision, and for the licensed surveyor to actually prepare the plan that gets lodged at Landgate. That's the item that you're actually paying for in terms of expenses. You're looking at somewhere around $3,500 to $4,000 to do that process.
Yep.
And that kind of depends on who you're going to, what works have they done in that area.
Yep.
Because it's not as simple as just rocking up GPS, installing pegs. They're actually going back to the original plan that created a lot in the first place and trying to create a continuation of those original marks in the ground to your new subdivision.
Make sure it all lines up
Make
to the
sure
millimetre.
that everyone's getting what they're meant to get.
Yep. Okay. There's obviously some lodgement fees with the government there. It all starts to add up. What are we looking at in terms of costs for your normal XXX, for example, as an average subdivision for a mum and dad survey strata investor?
For a triplex, you'd be looking at somewhere around 60 to 65 grand, depending on what your design looks like. A two-lot, you'll be looking at somewhere around 50 grand. If your council has any of these development contributions or POS in that, you're going to be adding to that cost.
Yeah. 20, 30, 40, $50,000, depending on where and how expensive your land is.
And in terms of your a percentage of your overall costs, it's huge. And that's where that
it will stymie development going forward if it continues to be pushing the boundary further and further with these councils.
Yeah, and if you're not getting that correct device at the start, you go through all the way of getting a conditional approval and then finding out
it's going to cost you $100,000.
No, I've got all these additional costs I didn't know about. To recap, we've gone from application stage of 4 months and $4,000, including surveying and application costs, and then we've got demolition, say 20 grand, depending on your size. That's adding a little bit extra for other items. So we're up to $24,000. We've got Western Power and then also Water Corp. So together, what were they, 7, 6,
round that up.
13. You can see how these items start adding up very quickly.
In a very short amount of time after that conditional approval. The saving grace, I guess, for people is you don't have to get this done straight away.
That's right. So once you get your conditional approval, you've got 3 years to complete all these works.
So if you can't afford maybe to pay for all these cash costs on top of the property you've just purchased, you got 3 years to save that up or pay it along the way. For a lot of first-time investors, or developers, I should say, who are looking at this reality and going, geez, I didn't realise this, maybe we're out. I would look at it as a case of you can lock down that site now, that is a good buy now for the right price, then you've made your profit now. You just have to realise that at whatever point in the future you can afford to get to the end of that process on.
My recommendation is if you're going to be doing something in terms of that long time frame of actually completing the works, if you can, pay off the Water Corp or the Western Power early.
Because they just keep going up.
Each financial year, they're going to go up. So you'll be kicking yourself if you go to pay it 3 years later and you realise that it's now costing you an additional $1,000.
Okay, so we're hitting 20 minutes, Dave. I reckon we wrap it up talking on costs there. The next episode will be about lodging for formal approval with WAPC and moving through to titles. How's that sound?
Yeah, going for that next phase of paperwork.
Yay. Thanks, mate. We'll speak to you soon.
See you, mate.
Okay, Suburb Spotlight time now. We are talking about one of Perth's oldest, most historic and most spoken about suburbs these days. It's the NIMBY town of Subiaco, and we have Subiaco's #1 agent. We have Niki Peinke in the studio, and I think we've got a lot to chat about today. Niki, thank you very much for coming in.
Oh, that's a pleasure, Trent. Look forward to it.
Hey, where do we start? Should we start with a bit of history?
Oh, we can start with a bit of history, depending how long you want to go back.
How far does your memory span?
Yeah, it's a bit like that.
Bit longer than, I hope a lot longer than your lifetime, because Subiaco probably goes 3 or 4 of those.
Subi, I think, originally, well, if you're going to go right back, it was the Noongar people who had it, but in, I think around 1851, the Benedictine monks came and settled there. That's why it was called Subiaco, because it came from the Italian Subiaco over there. And they settled there for quite a few years.
Any remnants there these days of any of their buildings, or are they just gone decades ago?
I would say they've pretty much gone. Sort of the earliest buildings in Subi now are probably about late 1800s whereas that was 1851. It's not that much difference, but not too much evidence.
These days, when most of us think about history, we think about the good old days of maybe 20 years ago in Subiaco where it was pumping. And things have slowed down. Obviously, there was a lot more residential life closer to the main streets. We're talking about Rockaby and Hay Street as the main thoroughfares. Tell us about the lifestyle of how that has evolved over the decades.
Okay, well, I guess an interesting part in the history of Subi is more around the 70s, where 60s and 70s, Subi was kind of one of those areas where it was a student hangout, a lot of shared houses by uni students, quite a bit of sort of interesting behaviour amongst young people. And so the houses were fairly run down and basic. They'd just been let go. And then it came to its own around the mid-80s, where people started coming into Subiaco and restoring and renovating and extending.
The money started coming in.
Money started coming in. I think the realisation of what a great suburb it was, how convenient it was.
How close it is
close to the
terrace.
city.
Yep.
and the character and everything. So it started going uphill from sort of early 80s. It really started to look good, and the old houses were not being pulled down, thankfully, but they were being restored and extended and turned back into beautiful homes.
To this day, Subiaco East, that's the way things are still, right? Some really beautiful restored Federation time homes.
Well, not just these, all through Subi. It's actually pretty hard now to find a house in Subi which is original. And if you do find one and it comes on the market, you get killed in the rush for it, either to renovate or to, depending, what era it is, because a lot of people like to build in Subi, but there aren't too many vacant blocks to do that now, or block value houses left. So luckily and happily for me, because I love the history of Subi, it's been the lovely old character homes have been retained.
Which is very rare. Most suburbs, they've gone.
Yes. And we had a big risk factor with the rezoning just a little while ago, where the whole suburb was threatened by the proposed rezoning of pretty much 3/4 of the suburb, which would have completely destroyed it. A little bit like back in the 60s and 70s when West Perth suffered that destruction and became office blocks instead of beautiful
very
old
much
homes.
so. And Subiaco is a bit of an extension of West Perth, right?
Yes, yep. So we've got to really protect it.
Let's talk about the different precincts of Subiaco, because we don't just have the old restored Subiaco close to Thomas Road. We've also got a lot of townhouses and apartments north of the railway. We've got Subiaco Square. There's a lot of density there and a different lifestyle there too, isn't there?
Yeah, that all grew up in around 2000. When that land, which was industrial land before, really became opened up for development, and a lot of apartment blocks built there and still being built there in actual fact, which brought
a younger professional
crowd. It was a bit of a mix. It was definitely a younger crowd because they weren't really suitable for an older crowd for a lot of reasons. But younger investors, overseas buyers, a whole mix. But it was just kind of a little bit unfortunate at the same time as they were all being built, a lot of the good things in Subi were being taken out of Subiaco.
Tell us about those, because that is an important story for the last 20 years to where we are right now, trying to revitalise what is in some ways a ghost town of what it used to be, a shadow of what it used to be on Rockaby Road.
Well, the main features of Subi back in the day, and when I say back in the day, sort of 20 years ago, was the Subiaco markets, the pavilion markets. People loved those. You had the cinemas, group of cinemas there. We had little eclectic shops with very different, a lot of handmade things and a lot of character in there, and it became known as that sort of a suburb. So people would come to Subiaco for the day. They'd go to the markets. They'd go and have lunch somewhere.
The destination.
Yeah. It would be a day destination. They'd arrive on the train and that was
I remember doing that when I was a young child. My mum would take me and we'd be at the supermarkets. We'd be, strolling through the stores and walk around Subiaco Oval and be like, one day we might watch a footy game.
Yeah.
And those, that jogs my memory. It is a memory of mine.
And I'm the market queen, so I was at those markets every weekend. Yep. So I remember it really, really well. Then all the apartments got built, and then sort of things changed and the markets closed down. At the same time, the cinemas closed down.
Don't we think that the apartments would have been planned to have added more people, more foot traffic to support these small businesses and the markets?
Well, the interesting sort of thing is that developments don't bring people to a place, the amenities do. Okay, so they'll come, but people aren't going to come to see an apartment block. So people will live there, but they will go out to do other things where the action is. So if you take all the attractive amenities out of Subiaco, then people aren't going to have a reason to go there anymore. So it doesn't matter how many apartments you build. People might come and sleep the night in them, but they'll go off to, another...
Leadville.
Yeah, they'll go off to Leadville or Northbridge
Claremont.
or Fremantle or wherever the action's happening or there's interesting things happening. So it's not helpful in itself. You have to have the amenities and the population density, but you can't have one without the other.
Yeah, very true. So where are we left with now? What's happening? What's the future of Subiaco in your opinion?
Okay, well, there are a few exciting sort of things happening in Subiaco. One of them is there is a development at the end of Rockaby Road, which is actually quite an exciting development.
Is this one Subiaco?
This is one Subiaco.
This is Mr. Blackburn's landmark development, really. This is as big as it's been, I think.
Yeah, well, what I like about it is it's giving back a lot to Subiaco. On the ground floor, there are going to be all sorts of interesting, exciting amenities. There's going to be a microbrewery and restaurants, and then they'll have weekend pop-up markets. So they're spending an awful lot of money on that ground floor, environment to make it really appealing, and it's going to be a sort of thing that's going to attract people from outside Subiaco in. Also, the apartments that he's building are just not the basic 1 or 2 bed apartments with nothing else happening. He's catered very much for the downsizer, and they are really the only people who, or not the only people, but a major part of the people who want apartments now, because
or the ones that have the money to downsize as well.
Exactly. They're used to huge homes or big homes, so they don't want to go into some tiny little apartment. They want the facilities, they want the security, they want the top finishes, they want the space and the convenience. And that is the one group of apartments that has got it all. He's putting in fantastic things in the complex, such as private dining rooms. So if you want to have a dinner party, you can invite your friends. There's a whole kitchen attached to it. It doesn't cost you anything. You can get your own caterers in. These are sort of things that older people want to do. They want to entertain, but they don't necessarily want to take on the whole responsibility.
And they don't need it on a daily basis either. Yep.
And it's got the pool, and it's got the gym, and it's got the facilities. It'll be more like a community, that group of apartments. It won't be just a block of apartments.
So we're a fan of this type of apartment where it's catering for the local market, but where I feel something in your voice that you weren't much of a fan of the stuff around Royd House, where it was for the younger first home buyers and investors who maybe didn't have any background in Subiaco to start with.
Yeah, I wasn't really a fan of them. That's absolutely true, because they didn't seem to be catering to anybody particular, just let's put them up and see who comes. And a lot of them were bought by foreign investors.
Yeah, and then those people aren't investing back into the community.
And also quite a few of them are vacant. It hasn't really added to the atmosphere of Subi in my book.
Okay, so for people outside of Subi who were maybe take a minute to let's sell Subi.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about the real amenities that people would be enjoying coming into Subi? For example, what are the top schools around town? We've got a new one obviously popping up very soon, but we also have some good junior schools, sporting opportunities for the youngsters, amenities for the older type as well. Hit me with the sales pitch for Subiaco itself.
Well, actually, Subi has got a really, really good range of amenities for just about everybody. It has got some of the top or primary schools. We're always having families trying to get into the catchment area of Rosalie Primary, of Subiaco Primary School. Obviously, Shenton College is a huge draw card, and it's in the catchment area for that as well. And the new Bob Hawke College, when it gets up and, it's up and going now, but when it
really hits its straps. Yep.
Yeah. So a lot of people even planning ahead now to get into the area.
We've got clients, like a specific one in my head right now, who are literally just trying to find something for the Bob Hawke College, which is, hasn't even started yet, and people are planning for that.
Yeah, well, these days you have to plan ahead for, these sort of things. And now with the one apartments, that's going to be a great place for older people to downsize to. They used to all go to Crawley, but there's no real amenity in Crawley, and if you want a pint of milk, you've got to get into your underground car park and cross 2 highways to go and get it. Whereas the amenity in Subiaco of going down the lift and out, and you've got everything at your fingertips. It's also right beside the station, which will
you got
take
Woolworths there, right?
Yeah, you've got a Woolworths, you've got a Coles, you've got a Farmer Jack's, you've got pretty much everything as far as shopping's concerned. The railway line will be going to the airport by the end of next year. And there are a lot of nice shops in Subi.
The theatre's still
The Regal Theatre is a huge draw card, and they have got cinemas opening up that are now built. I'm not quite sure when they're opening up, but...
Rosalie Park, I used to play soccer there a lot as a kid, and it's not just soccer there, there's rugby, cricket. That's a fantastic walking distance.
There's a lot of green space and the tennis courts there. So it lacks nothing, really. It's got a heap of character and a heap of personality, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful area. In a lot of ways, not a first homeowners or first home buyers market. You sort of need to be established financially to get in. Well, I think that's true in any city. If you're going to buy a house near a major city, it's going to get more and more expensive the closer to the city that you get. It's always been like that. And the option for young people now is to buy a smaller property in a city. But I find the trend at the moment is that a lot of young couples are wanting to go further out. It might be to Bayswater, Bassendean, Guildford Way, to get the land and the house and the kind of family environment, and they'd rather move out a bit and do that than buy a villa or a townhouse close to the city. Do you think that that's maybe something that Subiaco lacks and is going to lack with what is quite a protectionist rezoning strategy that's still not even approved? Well, I don't really understand I've got various thoughts about the strategy to build a whole lot of small units in Subiaco. But as I warned in one of my columns to the developers, you need to be really careful what you do build there, because if you're trying to attract young people, I mean, not everybody works in the city. And people who do work in the city and are younger are probably not want to go and buy a 1-bedroom unit these days. It doesn't seem to be the trend. I mean, it's actually quite hard to sell a unit now. Yeah, and the prices, and the prices have dropped significantly, like 25%. So I can't see why there's a huge drive to build units when nobody is actually seeming to want the ones that are available now. Well, let's talk about price points. Perfect segue. How cheap can it be in Subiaco to get something? As cheap as it gets is probably just under the $200,000 mark, where you'll get a 1-bedroom unit in like an older complex, a flat. Yep, okay. And you're saying they're pretty hard to move? Well, they are, because not really anybody wants them. I mean, at one stage you couldn't buy anything for under $200,000 in Subi, but now that you can, we're not being killed in the rush for them. Yeah, okay. And let's move up a price point. Yeah, well, let's go to $350. You can buy things now for $350 that you would have had to have paid $500 for 5-10 years ago. In that way, they're good buys, but then we don't know what the future market's going to be if we're going to have a plethora of units built. It's the old supply and demand story, isn't it? What are we buying at that price point? At $350, probably a nice 1-bedroom or a smaller 2-bedroom apartment. The newer ones? No, not the new ones. Older ones still. Okay. Yeah. All right. You start off the new ones probably very high 3s or 400, and it's going to be a 1-bedder. Okay. All right. What are we paying for our 2s and 3-bedroom apartments in the north of Subiaco? The new ones? Yeah. The new ones, you're probably for a 2x2, which is about 90 square metres, you're probably paying about $700 for. Yeah, okay. An old 2x2, which may be about 65 square metres, you're probably paying $450 for. All right. How about the townhouses? There's some really nice townhouses. Yeah. Townhouses are sort of probably wafting around the mid-6s. Isn't that interesting? That you can get a 2-bed apartment more expensive than a built on-land townhouse. Well, that's a smart 2-bed apartment with good finishes and modern facilities and all of that. A lot of the townhouses in Suba were built in the 80s. An average one which isn't been totally specced up but isn't original, you'd be talking around 650.
What about the ones in the north on the western side of Subi Square? There's a precinct there full of townhouses that are quite well
Oh,
specced.
you're talking about Subi Centro?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're not regarded as townhouses, even though they are sort of all joined. They're all green title.
Yep.
They were probably averagely selling around 1.6, but have probably dropped to about 1.35 now.
That's a very specific market there, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right.
But you do have $2 million properties there too. But
of course.
I'm just
There's some
talking
beautiful
average.
places there for sure.
There are some really lovely homes.
Let's get into old Subiaco. What are we paying to get 300-400 square metres with a nice house on it?
300 or 400 square metres with a nice character home, you're probably talking about 1.5. A really nicely, beautifully extended, renovated one on a smaller block, 1.75. And then anything on a larger block which has got good character and in nice condition, you're up around the 2 mil.
Yeah, wow. And what's the most expensive thing you've seen in the last couple of years go?
I've seen one on Lake Avenue that went for 3 mil. That is overlooking the lake. That would be the high end for Subiaco. That would be a pretty magnificent house, or in a magnificent location.
Wow. Well,
bit of both.
it just shows you can go from 190 to 3 mil,
Yeah.
but to be able to get that family home, you are in the 7 figures. Let's move into what is going to be the most contentious part of today for either people listening, or essentially probably for people listening. You're either on one side of the fence or the other when it comes to development. What is going on? Whether you agree with urban infill or you don't, one thing that we can probably agree on straight away is that this is taking too long to make a decision as to where this suburb's going.
Absolutely. Well, I understand the need for infill. I just don't understand why it has to be in the heart of our historic suburbs. These are all planning issues, and I've had a bit of a go at the planners, because if you plan a railway from the city of Perth to Joondalup, you'd think that you would plan that you would have some high density along that railway line. But to get out to the very sort of outer reaches of suburbia now, and then suddenly go, oh, we can't go any further, let's come back and destroy the historical cities right next to the city centre and destroy the history, that has me totally, I just don't understand that at all.
It seems like your perspective also reflects a large portion of the local residents' perspectives as well in Subiaco, at least in the historic east part of Subiaco.
Why would you rezone an entire suburb which was, full of beautiful historic homes that people had spent an awful lot of money on? And the way they've done it it's been like a game of Russian roulette. It's been like badly affected some people, well affected other people, and not affected other people at all. So the people who have been badly affected, of course, they're up in arms about it, because it's almost been very undemocratic from the way it's been done, and people have suffered, and people will suffer a financial loss through it because of how their block will be affected by the zoning on each side of them.
As you said, though, with everyone that's got a financial loss or perceived, there would also be a lot of people with a financial gain. You look at Nedlands, for example, they are probably on the same pegging with Subiaco in terms of the level of local residents who aren't a fan of change in that space. And you got properties on Smythe Road, for example. One real estate agent has sold, I think, 6 or 7 in a row in the space of 3 or 4 months at 50% higher than they would have been a year ago. Everyone's going, yep, sweet, I'll take my cash and move out, and someone else can deal with the townhouses that come up on my block. Or I don't want to be next to the townhouses, I'll get out and I'll take my profit.
Yeah.
And I'll take it somewhere else.
Yeah.
I think that there's probably a lot of pros and cons on both sides, but what we can't step away from is the state government's strategy, which does put the onus on every council to carry some of the burden of increasing their infill numbers. So the one Subiaco development would help a lot in terms of increasing the density numbers. I guess the Subiaco Oval, which we haven't spoken about much, the Subiaco Oval redevelopment area, there's a lot of space there to fill out a lot of those numbers. Is that where the opponents of urban infill in Subiaco would rather see that level of density and then still protect the historic area?
Absolutely. I think most people feel like I do. I'm not anti-development. I am anti-destruction of places of history, because as we all know, when we go overseas, that when we go to a city, we don't go and see the latest land development. We go to the old city, the historical place, the interesting, the parts that have got character and the parts that have got soul. And
once they're gone, they're gone.
They're gone. And West Perth was one of those areas that's gone. And I'm sort of pretty determined that it's not going to happen to Subi and Shenton Park. I don't understand why, when you've got places like Montario Green, which is a big piece of land, why you can't put high-rise there, which won't be destroying any history, won't be overlooking anybody or upsetting anyone. And but then they'll go and sell green title lots there, whilst over the road in Railway Road they'll be knocking down houses for, it doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
And I don't know how much sense is prevailing in the planning departments right now.
Well, what do you think about how the council is dealing with this at the moment? Is it one where the council is going to be, if it already isn't, a puppet, which is the point of councils, puppet representing the local word, or do they not represent? Do you see in 3 or 4 years' time, with the amount of support that the local action groups have, this ending up being a good compromise for Subiaco? Is there a positive hope for that?
Look, I think it might. There's still going to be people who will suffer, and there will still be destruction. There's no doubt about it. My idea of a council is to protect that suburb, and I would have been negotiating hard with the West Australian Planning Commission on their efforts, their first efforts of what they were planning to do. As it happened, I don't think the council fought hard enough for it, and it had to come down to the people demonstrating and really taking the brunt of that, which is quite exhausting. A lot of people don't have time to do this. It's happening big time in Netherlands at the moment, where all the community is getting together to fight because nobody's fighting for them, so they have to fight themselves. I really think that the council could have done a lot more to say, look, we understand your situation. Here are some ideas. I mean, we've got the whole of Princess Margaret Hospital site, a massive site. We have got the Oval and around the Oval. We have got space in Montario Green, which is just near the train line. There are lots of places to develop and develop well without destroying what's here already.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think this is going to be really interesting to keep watching in that space from the outside for a lot of people who enjoy Subiaco as a destination, but don't obviously have the vested interest that the residents in their thousands have on a daily basis that drive Hay Street and Rockaby Road and walk Hay Street and Rockaby Road and have invested in that lifestyle for decades. Be very interesting. It is very interesting to watch because you've got two analogues there of two different lifestyles but similar demographics, where the state government's already thumbed down Netherlands in, from my personal perspective, what I think is a good compromise from where it started. Most of it is literally just a block off of Stirling Highway, and most of those properties need some renewal anyway. The rest of it hasn't really been affected that much. And then Subiaco, where it's a bit more of a compact activity centre, and therefore it's much more sensitive as to you move it out one more street, it affects a lot more people. So it'll be interesting to see how that rolls in comparison to how Netherlands rolled. We'll move into that last part of today. Median house price. This is a good little one to finish on because, Niki, it's going to give you a chance to demonstrate from your perspective what is your favourite lifestyle in Subiaco for an average Subiaco resident. Niki, what is the median house price for Subiaco at the moment?
The median house price is about 1.15.
Okay, and if Niki Peinke had $1.15 million in her pocket today, if you do let me know, what would you be buying today in Subiaco?
I'd be buying a character home in a good street in maybe reasonably dilapidated condition.
Tell me that street. What would that street look like?
Gloucester Street's my favourite.
Okay, cool. Yep. That's people will be looking that up.
I do happen to have the most dilapidated house in Gloucester Street.
Oh, there you go. So you'll be buying the house you've already bought. There you go, walking the walk.
Yeah, well, that's why I held on to it. I bought it to store furniture for display. Years ago, it cost me about $350,000.
That must be many years ago.
It was about 20.
Yep.
Yeah, and it did incredibly well up until 2006. and then nothing much has happened since then.
Well,
That's
that
fine.
represents most of Perth, but to
Absolutely.
be able to move that well in that very short amount of time, what would be a very small mortgage these days, given if you bought it for the 300s, it demonstrates that in a good buy in a good street, the worst house in the best street is literally what you're telling us,
Yeah,
right?
it's always been that way, and it still is.
That must be the strategy in Subiaco.
Yeah.
Niki Peinke, thank you very much for what has been a very interesting, lengthy chat about one of Perth's most controversial suburbs in 2020. It'll be very interesting to see where we end up, and I look forward to having you on again to chat Subiaco, probably when the dust settles, and we'll see where it looks.
Exactly. And I look forward to that.
Thanks, mate.
We will fight the good fight.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Perth Property Show. If you've only just joined the conversation, you can catch up by heading over to our website, perthpropertyshow.com.au, subscribing to the podcast, or joining our Facebook page. Don't forget to tune in next Monday at 7 a.m. for more expert insights, local analysis, and suburb spotlights. Happy hunting!